Season 2 of the Strange, Rare, and Peculiar podcast, a place to learn more about homeopathy, deepening your knowledge, expanding your universe of possibility in the world of health and well-being through homeopathy.
Homeo what?
Homeo what?
A new January cohort is starting in just a few weeks. Many of you told us you didn't want to wait until September to start homeopathy school, and we listened. This part-time cohort will start January 29th, so get your application in now at ahe.online. Amy, our admissions specialist, is standing by to help you through the enrollment process. See you soon.
Yeah, we're going.
Here we go. Hello.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Good afternoon. And for people in other parts of the world, good morning.
Well, it doesn't matter where they are in the world because they'll listen to it at whatever time they listen to it.
Hence, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
It's been a funny old day. Welcome to your year.
Welcome to your year. It's January, first podcast of 2024.
It is. And it's that noise in the background is a crackling fire.
Yeah. So we're bringing you into the vibe here. It's a Sunday. We're recording this just after 5 o'clock. The sun is going down, and we are sitting in front of a fire and having green juice. No coffee, no tea.
No, definitely not.
It's cocktail hour. It's green juice hour.
Oh, let's not think about that.
You had quite a day.
My day, can I tell you that, the outside are about 250 bags of leaves that I'm just chipping my way through.
Right.
It was a dry, cold day, and I thought, what I'll do is I'll empty some of the bags and then I'll mulch them because I'm creating leaf mold.
Yes.
Mulch.
Yep.
Stuff. And so I went and I did that. I had a couple of layers on. I had my woolly hat on. I had the lawnmower. And I've also got the leaf sucker, just in case.
Leaf sucker it's a vacuum. He vacuums up the leaves and it chops them all up and then spits them out again.
Oh my God! It puts them in a bag and look, it creates the most amazing soil next year.
And it keeps you occupied, which is really nice.
Gets me out of the house. So I was there for 2.5 hours, and then I go and do some other tasks. Come back, and a giant tree. It's going to be an 80-foot tree. Cracked at the bottom and completely smashed through our fence, munted the archway where I was working, crushed the lawnmower, and I was there, I don't know, half an hour before.
I know, it's just terrifying.
I know.
I didn't even hear it.
It's a big tree, and it's gone, the outdoor shower's munted.
Yes, and you just rebuilt it.
I did too.
Oh, well. This is the peril of living in an arboretum and having an outdoor shower in the city.
Yeah.
But that was terrifying. I'm glad you're okay.
Yeah, no, I'm all right.
The day started out with our dishwasher breaking.
Exploding.
Finally.
Yeah.
It's been on its deathbed forever. It never worked. It was new when we bought our house 6 years ago, and it never worked. So, yeah, it was quite a day. Anyway, but all's good. I had a funny thing happen. I was having a meeting with Carly, who works with us, and she said, I was listening to your last podcast, and I was getting really worked up. I was like, what are you worked up about? She said, I was listening, and I could feel myself getting really, my heart beating, and it was really intense. And anyway, she went on and on. She really had me going, and then it turned out that it was on 1.25 speed. And she said, you were talking so fast. And, I do tend to talk fast, but that's
hilarious.
I know. So that was pretty funny.
We should do a poll. Who listens to us on warp speed?
Somebody told us that they do. Somebody's kid likes it. I'm sure there are plenty of ways in which people can find humor in it. Anywho, here we are. What are we talking about?
The beginning of the year, we've got a truckload of new things coming up. But I don't think that's going to be driving us today?
No. I think what we're going to talk about is, well, we just got back from 2 weeks in Italy, which was amazing. And we didn't work a whole lot. The one thing that I did, though, was I was working on my research for the Florida Homeopathic Society conference that I get to speak at in March.
Yep.
And I've got 12 hours. It's just me for 2 days. And it's all about autoimmunity. And, you know, this is sort of the core of the work that I do. So it was, you know, this is, it's right in my wheelhouse. But it was also, I wanted to learn more. I wanted to rethink all of the information. And, you know, so I've been doing a lot of research into sort of the newest pileup of autoimmune diseases that the AARDA, which is I think it's the American Association or Autoimmune Related Diseases Association, AARDA, and you know, it's really interesting to see what sort of is classified as an autoimmune condition, and also to look at what I've been doing is I've just been going through sort of the newer, you know, like PANS and PANDAS, the newer of the autoimmune conditions that are that we're seeing more of, and started to just do a deep dive into symptoms. And I was thinking about, you know, how do we address this as homeopaths, and how can I really clearly articulate this idea of how autoimmune disease and its presentation in an individual is not representative of the disease itself, but rather what is underneath of it, sort of what is the sort of, it's so hard to articulate without using all the homeopathy language, right? And also without having 12 hours to do it, which I'll have later on in the year. Anyway, the thing I wanted to talk about a little bit is how clear Hahnemann was about these types of diseases 200 years ago, 230 years ago. And what was so...
A somewhat controversial thing to say.
Why do you think it's controversial?
Because they didn't exist 200 years ago.
Well, actually, they did. And I don't want to spoil all the surprises that I have in this lecture, but they did. And some of the diseases can be traced straight back. But I think what's controversial is that over the course of Hahnemann's trajectory of the creation of a system of medicine, he learned and he learned and he learned, and he kept sort of picking it apart and putting it back together, picking it apart and putting it back together. And at the end of the day, everything rests in one place, and it rests in chronic diseases. And I think why this really is important for us to get comfortable with is that so for people who are kind of new to the homeopathy conversation, or maybe you're a student in your first or second year, and you're sort of in that space of trying to understand how these cases that present with a truckload of symptoms in every bodily system, how do we wrestle that? How do we wrangle that? And, at the end of the day, it comes down to Hahnemann's understanding of the manifestation of chronic diseases, and that it all rests on what he called sora. Yeah. So if you're not a homeopath, sora is spelled Psora, and the soric miasm, although it has been shorthanded into lots of contemporary work, it's a bear to really understand and to grapple with, because it encompasses so much of this idea of the presentation that we see in complex chronic disease, which, when you really boil it down, most of it is autoimmune related, right? Anyway, what do you think about that? Just as
I'm reminded of that hilarious, I don't know, was it a meal? Was it a bunch of drinks we were having? Atlanta, at the conference at Atlanta. You and I did a presentation on autoimmunity.
oh my goodness, I know exactly what you're going to talk about.
And that I loved that presentation we did because we focused on a number of cases and but also an analysis of the organon and realizing the degree to which the unfolding of complex chronic disease rested on good lifestyle, appropriate regimen, good diet, sleep, hydration, all of the fundamentals of life, right? And we spoke about that. We contextualized the treatment of complex chronic disease,
Right.
alongside of say regimen, and I think you presented your 10-year. I'm going to say
It was 9. It was a case of someone who had MS, and it was
Yeah.
9 years that we.
9 years of unfolding of that, and it was also a long conversation. I remember, and for me a really excellent one around the just let go of this simillimum
Right.
idea. And I think it went really, really well. And then we were having a debrief afterwards.
No, we were at.
What was it?
No, we were sitting with our team having dinner,
Yeah.
and this homeopath who, unbeknownst to us, had also presented on autoimmunity, either right before or right after us, and presented as if you give one remedy and their MS goes away, and things of that nature.
Just give a lanthanide.
Yeah. And so I wanted to start with just an aphorism from the Organon. So Hahnemann says in Aphorism 171 of the 6th edition of the Organon, in chronic diseases that are not venereal, therefore those most usually arising from psora. So in other words, Hahnemann had identified 3 sources of chronic disease, 2 of them being venereal or sexually transmitted, one being through syphilis and the other being what he called psychosis, Sycosis, and that is the figwort disease, what we would classify as HPV. Anyway, so he says if it's not acquired venereally, then it's the deepest root of disease, which is psora. He says one often needs to employ several anti-psoric remedies in succession to bring about a cure, each to be homeopathically selected in accordance with the result of an examination of the group of symptoms that remain after the previous means has completed its action.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, baby. Mm-hmm. And so there is a way in which the simillimum mythology in homeopathy, in other words, you uncover the deepest, darkest secrets, and then you use your unbelievable perceptive techniques and your shamanic ways to be able to see into a person's soul to find the analog in nature, and poof, everything is better.
Well, it's not to dismiss those examples where clearly that happens, but it's not on a regular basis.
Every now and again, you get one of those bingo cases, but at the end of the day, especially in the 21st century with complex autoimmunity, it's pretty tough. And it's, depending on how long a person has been symptomatic, or how long or how many obstacles to cure there are, it can be a real challenge. And I think one of the reasons that we wanted to talk about this again is because I think, becoming a homeopath is so, it's a road, isn't it? You can learn the academic portion, you can become clinically competent, in a couple of years, but there's a constant sort of reiterative process in getting deeper and deeper into understanding the applied philosophy?
Well, for me, there's a really critical word situation that you find yourself in, that we will find ourselves in, and that is that cases become complex cases.
Yeah.
You know, cases that perhaps at the beginning of our practice, not always, sometimes, you know, your first case is a hell of a hard one. But, you know, as we go through the years and the decades, our practices fill up with deeply chronic and complex and difficult people and situations and pathologies. And so many of them, what, in your practice, more than half, right?
I would say my practice is probably close to 75% complex autoimmunity.
Wow. Yeah. And so for us to say, you know, go and get in there for the long haul, don't rely on this idea of a simillimum, makes sense in that situation. And that's my experience over, just as the years mount up.
Well, and I think, you know, if we take our cue from Hahnemann, right? So, you know, if we just look at this, we got background noise. That's Alastair opening a door to let in a cat.
Hello, cat.
If we take our cue from Hahnemann, you know, remember that he changed his system over time. He adapted his system, and he learned from his successes, and he learned from the cases that he thought were resolved that weren't actually resolved. And so, you know, by the time, so if the first edition of the Organon was published in 1810, it was only 6 years later, in 1816, when Hahnemann said, hang on, people, I'll be back. And he began his research, and he says, you know, for the better part of 12 to 13 years, he spent studying his cases, because what seemed like a miraculous recovery was, in the case of a chronic disease, short-lived. And he had to go back and really look at what he had presented as his initial, you know, fundamental tenets of homeopathy, right? So, you know, in the beginning, homeopathy is a simple 4-principled exercise, one remedy at a time for the largest totality of symptoms that can be perceived, prescribed according to the law of similars, and the remedy given in the minimum dose needed to elicit a reaction by the vital force that moves it into healing. Right? So it seems simple enough, except that in the beginning, Hahnemann viewed everything through the same lens. So acute and chronic conditions were seen as if one and the same. And in that 12 to 13 year period, so from 1816 until the first publication of Chronic Diseases in 1828, and Chronic Diseases was published in 5 different installments, each of which, other than, I believe it's the second installment, each of which had its own prefatory notes, where Hahnemann was basically discussing, you know, the homeopathy news of the day. And, you know, during that time, he made a few really big discoveries. The first one that I think is really important is that not all remedies are equal. In other words, he says, you know, that his discovery of the chronic diseases for which an entirely new set of medicaments was required. In other words, when he was, you know, prior to his understanding of the difference in how you treat an acute issue or a chronic issue, prior to that, any remedy was fair game for any condition. By the time he gets to 1828 and going forward, he was grappling with which remedies were appropriate. So in other words, some plant remedies, some remedies from the herbal tradition might have a smaller scope of action and therefore might not be appropriate for the unraveling of that deeper chronic disease. He would say they would not be an anti-psoriatic remedy.
It's a bit tough, I think, that one, especially early on in study and practice.
I think it's really
because you look at you know, the acutest of all remedies: belladonna, aconite, euphrasia, chamomilla. You know, these remedies we use all the time, and
they can bring about resolution.
There's the eye symptom, and there's the nose symptom, and there's the skin symptom. Yep. And you think to yourself, well, okay, well, you know, there's my repertorization, and I'll lead off.
Right.
And And it's been interesting on a number of occasions. See, let's not go too far down a cul-de-sac, but you and I have sometimes talked about, I'm not sure if this remedy is going to be so good because it's too acute.
Yeah.
That's what I've heard you say. Mm-hmm. And I'm mostly in agreement with you, except I sometimes wonder if we know our acute remedies in the kind of depth that perhaps we could. And I think of a couple of cases, and one is a Rutter case that I had many, many years ago, and another is a Rust Hox case. And when I say a Rust Hox case, I'm going, that remedy did the job. And both were with a presentation of depression. And it's interesting because you wouldn't necessarily think about those two remedies.
Sure.
In fact, it was the concomitants that started heading me in that direction.
Yeah. Concomitants being the symptoms when you've got one or more symptoms, simply put, that they're sort of dependent on one another or they happen at the same time. I have eye pain and diarrhea, something like that. But there are symptoms that go together, and those are often really helpful in leading us to find a remedy.
Yeah, and in the case of Rust Hox, it was stiffness and pain and depression, and despondency and, vexation or whatever the version of it is. And so, I think to myself, that's a really, really good case. And until really listening to you noodle this out, I've always been... there was a period of time where I went, all remedies, I think they've got the capacity to evenly be used in any situation. And so I don't have a lot of cases where, quote, acute remedies have done really well in chronic situations, but those are a couple. Well,
I wonder if some of it is semantics and language, because I've got...
Oh, nice.
We talked about this with... I was telling you about a case. I have a guy who has ankylosing spondylitis and Rust Hox. He did beautifully on it for years, but it was superficial. Well, no, it was palliative. It worked. He was really happy with it. But I never felt as if I was uprooting his chronic disease. Because I think, so much of this is, to my mind anyway, so much of this is better understood when you think about what was Hahnemann getting at. That's the mindset I put myself in. Okay, so, what were Hahnemann's discoveries? What was he going for? Well, in the beginning, he's looking for, a system of rational medicine that would surpass the medicine of his time. As he gets deeper and deeper in, he's learning more. He's investigating more. Remember, he had facility with between 13 and 15 languages, depending on who you ask and where you look. Everything down to ancient Aramaic, which means that Hahnemann was uniquely placed to be able to make sense of a lot of historical evidence about healing and about cure. And I think, we had a conversation once about aphorism 2, rapid and gentle cure, right? And the complete annihilation of disease. And one of the things that I haven't done, actually, I was reading the first edition of the Organon earlier, looking at some comparative notes, because we've got some publications of author comparisons of the 5th and 6th editions of the Organon and the 4th and 6th, I believe, but not the 1st. And I'm quite interested in how much the language changed in Hahnemann's, sort of assessment about what he was doing, right? Because I think it's a different set of questions to ask. So, anybody who's listened to me talk about homeopathy for a while, I have done quite a bit of work on the history of where Hahnemann got his ideas, and have traced back through the history of chemistry and pharmacy and alchemy to sort of place Hahnemann in the appropriate lineage of medical discoveries. And if you sort of take it to its deepest root, right? What's he trying to do? Well, he went from creating a system of rational medicine to creating cure or to bringing about cure. And the bringing about of cure, if you think about what happens in the idea of chronic disease, right? Chronic disease is the gradual loss of life force. And when a person is treated appropriately with homeopathy, you're putting life force back into an organism that's otherwise losing life. Well, think about what that means, right? Just think about that at its most simplistic explanation, right? Giving life. Yeah? That's the elixir of life. That was the quest of the alchemists was, medical alchemy is different than turning lead into gold and all of those charlatan antics. And it's different than the 19th century and into 20th century sort of Jungian and post-Jungian interpretations of the spiritual quest. There's an actual scientific path of medical alchemy that Hahnemann was, that I've been able to place him in. So let's put it there and say then what he was doing was, cure, capital C cure, is the true annihilation of the root of the disease, right? Now, you can, I think, do good work without the true annihilation of the root of the disease. So that Rustock's case, the guy with ankylosing spondylitis, he would have been probably 60 years old by the time, maybe even older by the time I met him. He had a very healthy life, decent vitality. His symptoms were well managed, did fine, Did we pull out the root of the disease? Was he going to live forever? If the elixir of life is the eradication of disease, and if the annihilation of Sora has the potential to insinuate living forever, right? And what do you think about that?
I think, to a degree, it is semantics, isn't it?
I think it is.
But I am intrigued. It's snowing for the next couple of weeks. It's a perfect time to do a clinical audit, If I had a bunch of time, I would look at 6 years worth of cases. And why I say 6 years is that's a direct comparison because I did it previously. And what I would do is look at the remedies and the potencies and the posologies and the scales of the prescribing that I've done in recent times. And I have a suspicion, now I'm just going to project and imagine that I've done my, highly strong, my audit with a good method.
Al's now had to
good.
take a little pause because that sound you heard in the background was coming from the fireplace.
That explosion.
Yeah.
And I reckon my remedies are mainly mineral and mainly polycrests and mainly lower potencies.
When you say lower?
LM 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 and 30. 12 and 30. I think it would be a rare prescription for me to find a 200. A centesimal 200. Really. And so, and that's purely from the centesimal point of view. That's just looking around at the vitality my clients have, and it's not a lot. And so, necessarily, I think, as a reflection of that, my potency selection would be lower than when I did it in, I think I did it from 98 to 2004.
Oh my
gosh.
That
was the 6 years.
Sometimes, do you ever go back and you're teaching an old case and you go like, well, I can't believe I gave that potency. There's a case that I teach, the phosphoric acid case, where this woman had she really, if anybody who's listening who knows the remedy phosphoric acid, like she was totally in that. She was like, literally sliding off the chair. She had had a lung removed. She had rheumatoid arthritis. She had lupus. She had, I can't even remember what else. It was years and years ago. Anyway, and I gave her a 1M collective split dose.
Wow.
Yeah, I know. Could you imagine me doing that now?
No.
She did great.
Oh, that's interesting.
Right.
And that tells us something as well.
Yeah, it does. And also, I think, I mean, now we're on a posology cul-de-sac, but a student recently said something like, I've heard about people giving really high, potencies. Have you heard about that? and we had to laugh because, it's for, folks who have been around the block a few times, it's a bit like hemlines. Right? I mean, because when I first started, it was during high potency days.
Right.
Hence my 1M collector split dose.
Well, in that order, that's 6 years. When you look at that, I think it's about 6,500 prescriptions. Mm-hmm. And there's a bunch of 50Ms and a bunch of CMs. I wasn't holding back at all.
Yeah.
But not statistically or percentage-wise, not a lot.
Yeah.
My most prescribed remedy was 30, followed by 200, followed by LM1. It was,
yeah.
And I think if I looked at that today, it would be very different. I think it would be, for all of the reasons we've spoken about, repeated doses, liquid, succussed in between, and changed in between each time that the client takes the remedy. And as I said, the next part of it, which I think, I want to hear what you say about that, and that is, there's a nice smattering of the pulsatillas and the Staph agrias and sepias, but it's mineral town. It's mineral time.
Oh, I would say more than a smattering of the sepias.
Yeah, right. Okay. Well, I don't get that so much in my practice.
Right.
I get the the caladiums and the chimaphillas and
but I have it's funny because I've got
Agnes castus.
Right. Because I've worked with so many women who've had a lot of children. A lot meaning, more than, say, 6 or 7 or 8. And, for many of these women, sepia is sort of a tonic that gets them through their childbearing years. It's, it's well indicated, it helps and everything. And then, when their childbearing years are over, that postmenopausal time, sometimes, it's just like not indicated at all anymore, right? I've had a couple of cases where that remedy just carried, somebody through for years and years, and then. But I think part of this conversation is also about not being rigid.
Yeah, totally.
Right? I mean, because if we.
No, I'm saying I'm just making my observation in the spirit of I've noticed that.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. Yeah,
I would never really consider you rigid.
That's good.
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah, I don't think so. Not when it comes to homeopathy.
What about if we change plans?
Well, let's not get into that. I was being
but
kind.
You said dinner
right.
with...
Thought we were going there. But I think, it's important because Hahnemann, part of the other thing about Hahnemann was that he wasn't afraid to...
He was flexible.
He really
was amazingly flexible.
He must have been. His wife was how much younger? Sorry.
Henrietta wasn't.
Not Henrietta Johanna.
So was Kent. Have you ever read that article by Kent? It's in Lesser Writings, The Endless Field. It's
which is it? No, I don't.
I think you'd love it. It's on posology.
Oh.
Yep. And
I thought you were talking about young men with younger women. It sounded like.
No.
Oh.
It's called The Endless Field. It's a it's an address he gave at the Chicago blah 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 or the Cincinnati something, and it was I think post 1900. So I think all the books are published and everything. He's getting on in years, and the first thing he says is I must apologise. I haven't done a lot of preparation for this address because I've been ill, and then he goes on and gives an amazing address of the landscape of posology, and talking about the situations in which he, differentiates and goes high, low, or whatever it is, and his flexibility is the thing which is so striking. You wouldn't think of it.
No.
But he is. And it's amazing. The other, all three of them, I think Hahnemann, Lippi, when Lippy writes about posology, extraordinary.
I love Lippy.
You're a fan.
I'm a super fan.
You've left herring behind, haven't you?
I know.
Yeah. You're disappointed in herring?
The way I described it is he's a complicated character. He's complicated.
So it used to be, he's my hipster boyfriend.
Well, because if you
my
look
19th
at
century hipster boyfriend.
he was my 19th century homeo hipster boyfriend. But if you go back and look at the picture, just Google herring, one R. If it's two R's, it's a fish.
Yeah, that's the...
So if you just Google and look at the pictures of him when he had the long hair and the little round glasses, he looks like he should be living in Williamsburg, Brooklyn, making kombucha.
Pickles.
And pickles, right? But I think this idea, though, about absolutism in homeopathy, it takes us back around to where we started about autoimmune diseases, because there is, for us to be able to practice homeopathy effectively, we really do have to be sort of flexible in so many ways in our understanding of the client, in sort of the posology moves that we have to make. Like, yep, there are rules. And yes, there's also a way in which you get to learn a client's reactivity levels. Some people react to different remedies differently. There are little moves that we learn as we, do it for a while, where we're mixing, potencies as a way to sort of help the vital force move along. I mean, but as a student, as a new prescriber, I think it's overwhelming. And one of the things that when we introduce chronic diseases in semester 2, the students are always saying, well, what can I read on it? And I say, read the chronic diseases. Right, what else can I read on it? Because everybody wants secondary.
What do you say?
Read chronic diseases.
Okay, that's it.
Well, I know you have a couple. I mean,
I go to Chowdhury.
Yeah.
Well, if Demetriadis is a bridge too far, Chowdhury's good, and then because those are the two books that are kind of, I'm going to say right of center, if you know what I mean.
Yeah,
that don't get into the energetic transmission of chronic disease, which Ortega, Kant, Robb, it's all the same. And Henny, Hoyden's Mast.
Well, I don't mind the energetic part, because that goes along with the idea of epigenetics, really. I mean, I'm down with the infectious principle idea that Demetriadis stresses, but at the end of the day, we see the tendency. And I told you about that client that I had that got herpes from someone without, touching stuff.
Wow.
Yes. I couldn't believe it. I'm like, come on. You must have. So.
Dang.
I'm telling you. So this is, well, I don't want to go down this road because this could get convoluted, but where I think it becomes difficult for students to understand how to use the theory of chronic diseases in a helpful way in prescribing, especially when it comes to complex autoimmunity, is that most of the secondary literature has checklists. And it names symptoms. So you've got 3 columns, tick this one for syphilis, this one for psychosis, and this one for SORA, and then add it up, and then that gives you your miasm. And it just, I don't find that to be helpful, especially if you're talking about a named condition. So for example, asthma. You can have psoric asthma, syphilitic asthma, psychotic asthma. I mean, it all depends on the symptom presentation. So, the nuances are tough. And I think that, the point that I was hoping to sort of iron out a little bit tonight was just this way in which, because autoimmunity is, it's a concept that is not fully understood in the allopathic realm.
Yeah.
Especially with some of these emerging diseases, which is the part that I've been working on. And because of the reductionistic principles of allopathic medicine, especially in the infrastructure of the hospital system and the specialties in medicine, when you get into a polysystemic problem, it's really difficult for people to find someone in the medical field that can really help them, right? It's somebody who's going to a rheumatologist, going to an allergist, going to, I read a handful of articles about the role of the allergist in the treatment of pans and pandas. Yeah. Now, it's quite fascinating. Now, and it's a little bit more than we can get into in the podcast, but I think that some of these articles are really stressing the need to cross-pollinate.
It's a conventional article.
It's all conventional information that I've been gathering. Anyway, so aphorism 171, right? Hahnemann is giving us the okay to work through a case. And I think along with the challenges in understanding, well, what remedies are deep enough and what remedies aren't, and what totality do I look at? Totality becomes the driving force in the decision making. And once you're working with autoimmunity, you are often working with what Hahnemann would call developed sora. In other words, that underlayment of the disease has been shaken up. And once that is evident, your symptoms are going to be all over the place. It makes it more difficult to find the presenting totality, which is why I think an astute case taker, like you were talking before about finding concomitant symptoms, right? This idea of understanding what is hierarchically important and appropriate, it becomes really important. So the nuances of case analysis are really key in solving these cases, but it's also about long-term case management. Right? Long-term case management becomes one of the most important aspects of being able to carry a case through, especially because it can take several years to unravel some of these issues.
Who was it that called Sora, the Hydra-headed monster?
Hahnemann.
Really?
Yeah. I'm pretty sure. I can picture the reference. Why? Let me see if I can find it really quickly.
Because I'm remembering water snake with 9 heads or something.
Yeah.
Yeah. I like what you taught me in recent times, that advanced active autoimmunity, being active, advanced, developed.
Sora.
Yeah,
that's exactly what it is.
Manifesting in clients with 8 systems with either developed characteristic symptoms or common undeveloped characteristic symptoms, some of which emerge louder after a prescription, some of which disappear, whatever that silent and dominating state process is. I think it's such a great way to think about it.
And then sometimes you're going along in a case, and then it kind of comes to a point. And sometimes a more acute remedy is absolutely appropriate because it's like this flare-up that's showing you, right, one part of the symptom picture, and it comes right off the top, and you go back to the chronic remedy again.
It's very interesting. So you're following symptoms.
Yep.
Yeah. So this is going to be fascinating. Can I sit in the back of the room?
Sure, why not? Yeah, I mean, I hope that it is. I am. It's been really fun to take this time to say I'm going to ask myself a whole lot of questions about the work that I've been doing, right? Because when you do something, it's like riding a bike. You don't think about, oh, well, first I put my leg over the seat, and then I make sure the pedals are in the right way, and then I start riding, and then you just, you sort of know what you're doing. But, as a teacher, you're constantly, like, for me in clinic, it's always breaking down the thinking and showing the students step by step by step. But one of the things that I've been working on is just kind of going back to 30,000 feet and saying, okay, so what could Hahnemann have been thinking about when he's making this quote unquote discovery of Sora?
Yeah.
Because, I always loved the story, like in Misha Norland's book, the Signatures, Miasms, AIDS, and that's one of the places where he wrote about the Garden of Eden and original sin and being, all of that. And I know that in the, as you would say, the right of center camp, there would be eye rolling. My eyes are not rolling. My eyebrows are up, and I'm going, right, let's talk more about this, because the allegory... the allegorical nature of understanding is what helps us get to deeper places as we do. It's sort of, you've got to think about all of that, right? And so if Hahnemann was going back into, 8th century Persian medical literature, those allegorical messages are going to be there. If you are studying alchemical medical alchemy, you're also having to look at imagery to understand how to get to the chemical steps, right? And so I think that that's actually helpful information. You sort of need both. You need to balance both, right? Yeah. So I actually find that super helpful. Yeah.
You've been very busy in the last couple of weeks. No, you have. Yeah, we were on a break, but you've been thinking and chewing and writing.
Yeah.
Same with me, but I've been on a very different course. Maybe we'll talk about that another time. Technology and the way in which technologies have driven change in homeopathy.
That is quite an interesting conversation.
Oh, yeah.
There was one more thing that I wanted to... What were we talking about before? Oh, actually, one other thing. Let's just wrap this up, though, to say, with autoimmunity, and this is a conversation that can go on for a really long time, but it's, as we get back on the horse in 2024, just getting ourselves thinking about the complexity of homeopathy and the flexibility required to practice, and looking for rigid rules and cookie cutter explanations for how things go is not going to be helpful. But actually to really sit in the process and to really think about the why. The one thing I learned about studying medical history was, or it's really just about studying history, was this idea of going back in time and not just reading what people wrote, but questioning sort of their motive, or why did they ask the question, and then seeing the conversations and the grappling between people in a particular era to solve a problem. You can't underestimate that when you're practicing, a 19th century modality in the 21st century, right? And so at the end of the day, what Hahnemann is saying is, homeopathy is based on universal laws. They don't change. Science can change, right? Because everything that is scientific is stated as if it's fact, but it's only fact in the moment until we learn something new, right? And so by looking at where Hahnemann was and asking the questions of what was he trying to figure out, and I think the hardest one of all for us is really, what was he trying to figure out with Sora, right? And where did this information come from? I mean, I've got some ideas of that, but it's not entirely clear, right?
I think, well, there's two things. The first thing is that the noise that you're probably hearing in the background is the dog chewing on a bone.
Yeah, there is that.
So that's
She
very
got
important.
a new bone.
Yeah, right. And the fire and the cats. This has been quite a...
It's a Sunday afternoon
It is.
podcast.
The other thing is that, Hahnemann seems to have been driven by experience most of the time.
Yep.
I'll give you an example. There's a link at the very, very beginning of his life. Sorry, not of his life, but the beginning of homeopathy, 1790. What on earth? So he's reading Cullen's Materia Medica.
Yep.
We all know that story, blah, blah, blah.
Yep.
He's reading it, and then he says, well, that can't be right. And then he says, I'm going to take some. How does that happen? That link,
Right.
that leap.
Right.
I've never seen an explanation for that, other than I'm going to experiment on myself. Like, that doesn't make sense. People don't go, oh, I've made an intellectual decision that the reason that Peruvian bark is useful in malaria cannot be because of its bitter qualities.
Right.
Right? Why would he take some? So I think there's plenty of those historical question marks along along the road. And like you said, in 1816, or at the point in which he, in my movie, naked runs down from the bathroom saying, honey, this is my eureka moment. There's 3 diseases. I've worked it out. There's only 3 diseases on the planet. Like, stop. Like, how did that happen?
Yeah. Well, it's like, how did he get to the numerics of the, LN potency, Q potency?
Yeah, right. And how did he get that number wrong? Well, at least the description of it.
Because of there's the missing footnote.
That's interesting. You're saying that the reason he called it LM and not Q was because of the footnote?
No. Sorry, not the LMQ.
Okay, got it.
There is
historical gaps. I think we should just fill them in authoritatively. Write a screenplay and just make the movie.
Let's wait until after the movie about homeopathy is out. Which, if you don't know about it, it's getting close. Introducing homeopathy. I think it's going to be amazing. I'm really excited.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah. So the moral of today's story is flexibility is key in homeopathy. Looking for definitive answers and rigid sort of applications of philosophy, not always helpful. Potency is, potency and posology are fluid sometimes.
And a clear overlap between modern manifestations of autoimmune conditions.
Well,
and Hahnemann's Sora.
100%.
Yeah.
100%.
Nice.
Yep.
All right.
That's it.
Wow.
Let's do it again sometime.
Well, let's do it again next Friday.
Yeah. We're back on the horse, guys. And we'll be having regular podcasts again.
Cool.
Yeah. All right. Take care, everybody. See you soon.
Home Foundation is hard at work. The Practitioner-Generated Research Network is like nothing the homeopathy community has seen before. Through the PGRN, we will be able to bring groundbreaking research to the world that will help protect homeopathy for generations to come. Learn more about how you can contribute to research at homefoundation.org. That's home, HOHM, foundation.org.